My name is Mike Greenhouse. This is a Relix conversation. We are here with Bill Kreutzmann and Benjy Eisen at the beautiful Morrison Hotel Galleries. I'm actually used to having Benjy on this side of the sofa. We've been writing collaborators for about 10 years now. We actually wrote our first Relix cover story together on the Disco Biscuits, who we'll talk about a little bit later.
15 years ago, maybe.
I think it was 10 years ago. It was when Sammy left. So.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
And we hosted a podcast together called Cold Turkey for about 5 years, which was the very first magazine podcast. And while that term is not antiquated yet, we're still proud of it. So
it also means we're old.
It also means we're old.
Hey, wait a minute now. Hold on that one.
There's a difference between
it's
old
my
and
birthday.
retro.
My
right?
birthday's tomorrow.
Happy birthday!
So that's why I was bringing that up.
I didn't know you shared, a birthday week with the first Grateful Dead show and your actual birthday. That was a big week for you.
It has been in the past, but around my birthday, the most amazing things happened. And when the Grateful Dead was playing, they really got far out.
Yeah.
For some, just the energy around your birthday is just like that.
Ithaca.
Yeah.
57.
Yeah.
77.
Nice. Good for you, man.
And
I think that was the date, right?
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, your book came out this week, The Ads of the Celebration, which you guys have been working on for about 3 years now, if I'm correct.
Right.
So let's start talking about some of your more recent shows, and we could dive into the book and the Grateful Dead and all the other stuff that you guys have going on in the works. And you just came back from New Orleans, where you played with a new band called Voodoo Dead, which is put together for these shows, featuring what's really been described as a group of jam band royalty. You had all sorts of musicians, and in my opinion, New Orleans music has been a kind of a source style for you since the Grateful Dead broke up. You played with George Porter for a couple years. I heard he actually retaught you how to play Hey Packy Way. So I guess what led you to kind of rediscover New Orleans music at this point?
Rediscovered it, or I've always liked New Orleans music.
Or I guess dive a little deeper into it.
I liked it because my mother's from New Orleans.
Really?
I have blood there, and I grew up in Palo Alto, and lucky for me, she always played great music. She played Ray Charles and all these really great black musicians. And so I grew up listening to that and not listening to Top 40. Didn't even know what Top 40 was. And you go to school and put on, here, remember these 10 songs? I go, what is that? It just didn't work.
Right. And you played with George Porter, recently, and the Meters were kind of doing similar things to the Grateful Dead just across the country for many, many years. When did you first discover, I guess, the kind of the improv community down there? I know the Neville Brothers opened for the Dead many times, and you guys, as I said, more recently have crossed paths in some different ways.
I think it's the improv thing you're asking about is that there's just really good musicians there.
Yeah.
And part of being a good musician is to be able to improvise. Okay, and that's, if you think it's any group of musicians, it's just those guys down there all can do that night and day.
And Benjy, you had a big hand in kind of putting together this Voodoo Dead band. How did, who's the first call to put your band together?
Well, Billy and the Kids, I think it was my dream lineup that I had in my head for a few years, and we were trying to do a Billy and the Kids show in New Orleans, and we couldn't quite do it, but we knew that, Billy loves New Orleans so much. He said, man, I just want to play. So then, we had the dates in our mind, and we were thinking about who we could do it with. Billy loves playing with Steve Kimmock, and the collaboration goes back years and years, obviously. And they're also pretty damn good together. So I started talking to Kimmock's wife, to Jen Kimmock, about on Jam Cruise. We were sitting there, kind of just going through the Rolodex in our mind, and she said, well, wouldn't Jeff Chimenti be great for it? And and we couldn't find a bass player. That was the problem, was finding a bass player for it. We talked about a lot of the players that we've been playing with a lot lately, but then all of a sudden I looked at Jazz Fest schedule, and I just said, Widespread Planet's headlining the fairgrounds on Thursday night, and they're off tour after that. Well, obviously, School's knowing him. He's going to be in New Orleans.
Right.
He's going to be hanging out. He's going to want to be playing with anybody, and he was in a band with Mickey. So I was like, well, maybe he should be in a band with Billy too.
Yeah.
And it worked quite well, so worked great.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you couldn't find a bassist during Jazz Fest in New Orleans, I think you guys had bigger problems then. And I guess, Benjy, when you were kind of, digging in the Billy story, did you read into a lot of the kind of classic Grateful Dead books, or do you kind of go in with a fresh slate?
Well, it's interesting. I read every single Grateful Dead book that was out there. I took notes on all of them. There's a lot, dude.
So many books.
I remember thinking when I first went over there and I didn't know Billy that well, I remember thinking, man, you've done so much work. Not just, people see the concerts and they hear but there's a lot of work. And when you read the books and even the business books, the Grateful Dead rewrote the book, so to speak, on how to do business. not just for bands, but even corporations, look after their business model. So getting out there, well, one, I didn't know anything about Billy before 1965.
Right.
And that was all locked in his mind. And so, we got it out pretty, over a 3-year process where sometimes we'd just be driving in a car and be like, oh, this reminds me of Not for the Book, and I'd just be like, oh.
Yeah. He's really good at that. If I even hum a tune, he'll write it down.
Yeah.
Or anything. He'll write every little dot down that I mentioned, which is great.
He let your subconscious tell the story.
I'm one of those people that go, oh yeah, remember that dream when you wake up? Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you still haven't woken up.
Well, that's good. The dream's still going on then.
Dream.
It's a long dream.
But but the other thing about it, though, is that in reading the books, I realized that a lot of the books didn't agree with each other about facts.
Right.
Rod Scully says one thing, Dennis McNally says another, Phil's book says another, and so when Billy would tell me something that veered from what I had read, I was always like, oh, that's not actually how it happened, and he'd be like, were you there?
Well, that's the thing about those other books, is none of those people were actually there. They're from interviews and collected stories from this person telling somebody a story. You know how that goes and gets changed.
Well, and the people that were there, memories, perspective.
Including me.
Yeah.
That was one of Benjy's biggest jobs, was correlating my facts and making sure I wasn't making up things on timelines and putting them together when really they happened maybe months apart.
Well, Bill, given that there's so many books on the dead out there, and this is your memoir, meaning that it's your story told through the lens of the Grateful Dead. Was there anything that you wanted to highlight that you don't think has been properly represented in the other books and articles that have been written about the dead over the years?
Well, there's just lots of stuff that nobody can know but me.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was from when I first started learning to play music and my influences, if that mattered. And the very first time I played music, we had friends sitting on a couch like this, and I had my drums over there, a guitar player, and he knew Johnny B. Good, and we had a bass player who knew about as much on the bass as I did on the drums, which was nearly nothing when I was that young, and I hadn't even had a drum lesson yet. And my dad had rented me a snare drum and a hi-hat, and that was all. And we're playing away, and about the fourth song, the guitar player knew Johnny B. Good. And it was the first time that I ever got to play a song like Johnny B. Good, and we nailed it. I look over there, and all the kids on the couch are dancing now. And I'm going, that's what, that works.
Right.
So what I'm feeling inside is communicating to those people. And it was like a very moving thing. And I wrote that stuff in the book because nobody else can know about those things.
Also, Billy, I had a watershed moment that I just realized right now, and that's when
you are a little wet.
No comment. But when we first started out, with the book, I remember thinking, what is it that's gonna be different other than it's your perspective and your stories? And there was a moment when we were listening to the Grateful Dead in your living room. And I remember, and you picked up like a little hand drum or something and started slowly, and I remember thinking, and the coolest thing to me was watching, you play along with your you from the 70s. But then at one point you looked up, and this was not for the book. This was, we went out to dinner, we came back, the book was, we were going to work on it again the next day, and you got very emotional. You teared up and got really choked up, and you said, and you weren't fishing for a compliment or anything, but you said, we were a really good band, weren't we?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you guys were the Grateful Dead.
We were a damn good band.
And we talked about that for a minute, and I just remember thinking, this is what I hope that you get to, I hope that we get to capture in your book, because your story about the Grateful Dead, it's also a love story to the Grateful Dead as much as to life itself. And I think that that's something that in other Grateful Dead books you don't have, because Billy was the first Deadhead.
I really believe I was the first Dead. I was watching Jerry play with Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Champions, and I was sitting here, and he's where you are, playing banjo with Pigpen, Bob Weir, and Hunter. Okay, Hunter's playing guitar. Pigpen was playing one string bass, whatever that thing's called, not washboard, but that kind of bass. And the thing about it, I'm sitting there this close to Garcia for the first time and really watching him, and he had the whole place right here. And everybody was tuned into him, and everybody was smiling and having a good time. And I said as loud as you could say to yourself, I'm going to follow that guy forever.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that I just made a meta statement, that's I'm probably going to lock into that idea for a while. And it turned out to be true. About 2 weeks later, he knew I wasn't playing in a band at the time, and I was like the local kid drummer in Palo Alto, 18 kids, I guess. And he called me up and said, you want to be in a band? I said, sure. I didn't hesitate. I didn't have a band, and when you're a musician and you don't have a band to play in, it's like having the flu every day. It just kind of gets worse, you know.
I've led a kind of an unusual life. I was a 16-year-old kid when I started playing with the Grateful Dead. I was following my bliss. Jerry was the lead guitarist. I was the rhythm guitarist.
If you don't have an ego, you can be the best number 2 on the planet, and that's kind of what Bob became.
The music was an adventure. The people were an adventurous group. You just had to see it to see it. Mine has been a long, strange trip.